grow up believing that reality is something solid, fixed, and independent of us. We are taught that the world exists out there, complete and finished, waiting to be observed, measured, and explained. Objects seem stable. Time appears linear, and space feels empty, like a stage where events simply happen. This view becomes so familiar that we stop questioning it. Yet beneath this apparent solidity, something far more subtle is taking place. What we call reality may not be a static structure at all, but a continuous unfolding, one that is deeply entangled with the act of observing itself. When physics began to explore the smallest scales of existence, this certainty started to dissolve. At the quantum level, matter no longer behaves like solid objects moving through empty space. Particles do not possess fixed positions or definite states until they are measured. Instead, they exist as probabilities, as waves of potential that only crystallize into form through interaction. This discovery did not merely challenge classical physics. It quietly questioned the very idea of an objective reality existing independently of awareness. An electron, for example, is not a tiny sphere orbiting like a planet. It is a mathematical description of possibilities spread across space, nowhere and everywhere at once. Only when observed does it take on a definite expression. This does not mean that consciousness magically creates matter, but it does mean that the observer cannot be fully separated from what is observed. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is participatory. Reality responds to attention. Long before science reached these conclusions, contemplative traditions were pointing inward. They spoke of a silent witness behind thoughts, emotions, and sensations. A presence that does not move, does not change, and does not age. While the outer world appears in constant motion, this inner awareness remains still. It observes thoughts come and go the same way it observes clouds passing through the sky. The clouds change. The sky does not. This is where physics and spirituality quietly meet, not in belief, but in structure. Both suggest that what we perceive as solid is secondary, and that beneath form lies a field of potential. In physics, this is called the quantum field. In spirituality, it is often described as pure awareness. Different languages, different methods, yet an eerily similar insight. What appears stable is emerging from something far more fundamental and subtle. We spend most of our lives identified with movement, with thoughts racing forward and backward in time, with emotions reacting to memories and expectations, with identities built from stories about who we think we are. In this constant motion, stillness feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Yet stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is the background against which all experiences appear. If you pause for a moment and observe your own experience, you may notice something profound. Thoughts arise, linger briefly, and dissolve. Sensations appear, shift, and fade. Even your sense of self, your name, history, and personality is not fixed. It changes subtly over time, and yet something remains unchanged throughout all of it. The one who is aware of these changes, the one who notices. This awareness does not require effort. It is already present. You do not create it through thinking, nor can you lose it through distraction. It was there before your first memory and remains present now. It is the silent constant within experience. This is the still within, not a forced calm, but the natural state beneath all activity. In quantum physics, empty space is not truly empty. Even in a vacuum, particles spontaneously appear and disappear. Energy fluctuates. Fields vibrate. What we once thought was nothingness is actually teeming with invisible activity. In the same way, inner stillness is not a blank void. It is alive, alert, and aware. It is the ground from which thoughts and perceptions emerge. The more deeply science looks outward, the more it seems to circle back inward. Space and time are no longer absolute. Observation alters outcomes. Separation becomes less clear. The universe reveals itself not as a collection of independent parts, but as an interconnected whole. Boundaries soften. Certainty fades. Mystery returns, not as ignorance, but as depth. This does not mean abandoning reason or logic. It means recognizing their limits. Just as a map is not the territory, a model of reality is not reality itself. Equations describe patterns, but they do not contain experience. Awareness is not something you can point to. Yet it is undeniable. Everything you have ever known has appeared within it. Stillness, in this sense, is not something to achieve. It is something to notice. When you stop chasing thoughts, when attention rests without effort, there is a quiet clarity. Not dramatic, not mystical, simply present. This presence does not judge, it does not rush, it does not demand answers. It allows reality to unfold as it is. Perhaps this is why modern life feels so heavy. We live almost entirely in motion, mentally, emotionally, digitally. Silence becomes rare. Attention is constantly pulled outward, yet the deeper truth has not disappeared. It remains patiently available beneath the noise, waiting not to be found, but to be recognized. In the end, the most radical realization may be the simplest one. You're not a separate observer trapped inside a vast, indifferent universe. You are part of the process by which the universe becomes aware of itself. Reality is not happening to you. It is happening with you. And beneath every thought, every question, every search for meaning, there is something quietly present, unmoving, unchanging. Still, it has always been there. Still within. Still within does not mean retreating from the world or rejecting its complexity. It does not require isolation, silence in a physical sense, or the absence of movement. It points to something far more precise: the recognition that movement happens within stillness, not the other way around. Every sound arises within silence. Every thought appears within awareness. Even chaos unfolds inside a deeper order that remains untouched by disturbance. When attention turns inward, not through force but through curiosity, a subtle shift occurs. Experience is no longer interpreted solely through the lens of thoughts. There is a widening, a loosening of the constant internal narration. Perception becomes more direct. Colors feel sharper, sounds more dimensional, sensations more immediate, not because the world has changed, but because fewer layers of interpretation stand between awareness and experience. In physics, when systems are observed without excessive interference, their behavior becomes clearer. Noise distorts measurement. In the same way, excessive mental commentary distorts perception. Stillness is not passive. It is a refined sensitivity. It allows reality to be perceived with less distortion, closer to its raw form. What emerges is not an answer, but a deeper quality of seeing. The mind often resists this simplicity. It seeks conclusions, definitions, and frameworks to hold on to. Yet the deepest insights rarely arrive as statements. They arrive as shifts in orientation, a quiet understanding that does not announce itself, a recognition that does not require explanation, like suddenly realizing that you have been breathing all along. Time, when observed carefully, also begins to feel less rigid. Past and future reveal themselves as mental constructions appearing in the present moment. Memory arises now. Anticipation arises now. The only place experience ever occurs is here. This does not deny chronological time, but it places it within awareness rather than above it. Time becomes something perceived, not something that imprisons. Quantum theory echoes this subtlety. Events are not always ordered in the way common sense expects. At fundamental levels, causality becomes probabilistic. Outcomes are not strictly determined until interaction occurs. Reality behaves less like a rigid chain of events and more like a fluid field of tendencies. What we experience as certainty emerges from deeper layers of within this indeterminacy lies freedom, not the freedom of control, but the freedom of openness. When identity loosens its grip, experience flows with less resistance. Thoughts still arise. Emotions still move. Life continues with all its complexity, but there is less contraction around it, less need to define, defend, or solidify what is essentially dynamic. The sense of a separate self often feels central and unquestionable, yet when examined closely, it reveals itself as a pattern rather than a thing, a narrative continuously updated by memory, sensation, and expectation, useful, functional, but not absolute. Awareness, on the other hand, has no edges. It does not belong to the narrative. The narrative appears within it. This does not lead to detachment or indifference. Quite the opposite. When separation softens, sensitivity increases. Compassion arises naturally, not as a moral obligation, but as a recognition of shared presence. The same field of awareness that experiences your thoughts experiences the world through countless forms. Difference remains, but isolation fades. Modern science often speaks of the universe as fundamentally relational. Particles do not exist in isolation. Their properties depend on context, interaction, and measurement. Identity at the smallest scales is not intrinsic but emergent. In a parallel way, personal identity emerges through relationship with environment, with others, with thought itself. There is no fixed core, only a living process. Stillness allows this process to be seen clearly, not frozen, not analyzed, but witnessed. In witnessing, there is a subtle release. Experience no longer needs to be owned. Joy does not need to be grasped. Difficulty does not need to be resisted. Everything is allowed to arise and pass, leaving awareness untouched. This untouched quality is often misunderstood as distance or absence. In truth, it is intimacy without attachment. To be fully present without being consumed, to engage without losing clarity. Stillness does not remove you from life. It places you at its center. Even uncertainty begins to feel different. Instead of something to eliminate, it becomes a natural condition of existence. The universe does not reveal itself all at once. It unfolds. Questions remain open. Mystery is not a flaw in understanding, but a fundamental feature of reality. Stillness is comfortable with not knowing. From this perspective, meaning is not something imposed from outside. It is not a destination to be reached. Meaning emerges from presence itself, from the quality of attention brought to each moment. When awareness is clear, even ordinary experiences carry depth. Simplicity becomes sufficient. The search that once felt urgent slowly relaxes, not because everything has been solved, but because the one who was searching is seen more clearly. The movement toward fulfillment is recognized as another appearance within awareness, and awareness, already whole, no longer needs to chase itself. This does not end thought. It contextualizes it. Thought becomes a tool rather than a master, useful for navigation, creation, communication, no longer mistaken for reality itself. When thought quiets, even briefly, what remains is not emptiness, but presence. In this presence, the boundary between inner and outer becomes less defined. Sensation, perception, and awareness form a single continuum. The body is no longer felt as an object you inhabit, but as an expression of the same field that forms stars, particles, and space itself, not conceptually, but experientially. Physics may never fully describe consciousness, just as spirituality may never fully describe the universe. Yet both, at their deepest levels, point toward humility. toward the recognition that reality exceeds our models, that what we know floats within a much larger unknown. Still within is not an answer to this unknown. It is an orientation toward it, a willingness to remain present without demanding closure, to rest in awareness while life continues to unfold in all its unpredictability. Nothing needs to be added to this moment for it to be complete. Nothing needs to be removed. Beneath thoughts, beneath identity, beneath the endless movement of becoming, there is something quietly stable. It does not announce itself. It does not seek attention. It does not disappear. It remains still within.